Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Can everyone hear me? Cool. Thank you. Thank you for coming and zooming in. My name is Jay Edwards. I use him, his pronouns. I'm a part of Radical Kindred and Black Boone, um, and helped organize this with a bunch of other people. And then, yeah, I'll let Mary introduce herself.
Hey everyone, my name is Mary Lyons. My pronouns are she and her. I'm also working with Black and Boone and have seen Radical Kindred grow beautifully over the past few years. Really happy that all of you have made the time to join us today as we, celebrate and learn about Pride.
Great. Awesome. So what's going to happen today is we're going to be having an educational call to action. So the first part is going to be led by Ayana and Avery, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. And what's going to happen is we're going to learn about some representation, queer Black representation in film. And then also we're going to learn about the history of Stonewall and what really happened and how the misconceptions that we hear about it, and some myth busting and stuff like that. So Ayana, if you're ready, please take it away.
Cool. Okay. Hi, my name is Ayana. I'm going to be doing a little presentation on LGBT representation in film. It's like the best way I could title this. It's more of like an amalgamation of just LGBT related things in film. So I'm just going to attempt to share my screen and pray that this goes well. I am a film studies major at App State. I'm a rising senior and my pronouns are her, hers. So, all right, let's see, I think present. Cool, here we go. So this is just the title slide. Nothing really important here. So I'm just gonna first start off by talking about sort of how we as LGBT people have sort of been around with film since its very beginning. The very first instance of something that is seen as more homoerotic in film happens in 1895. It is the film is called the Dixon Experimental Sound Film. During this time, they didn't really have sound that like synced up with the video. So I think they were like experimenting different ways to sync them together. So here, like in the left image, you see these two men dancing together and another man is like playing the violin. And it's literally just like a short clip of them just dancing together. There's nothing like weird going on, they're just dancing. And this is what historians point to as the first homoerotic like instance of like LGBT like representation in film. There could possibly be even earlier representations, but we don't know because a lot of early film has been lost due to it being shot on nitrate, which is basically a substance that is like combustible. So sometimes if you were to like open these films, like they would just catch on fire. So a lot of film is just lost and that kind of stinks. So there's that. And it's strange because in this instance, which is for, earlier than the second example I'm going to bring up, audiences were sort of like disgusted by just the dancing, even though it wasn't even very sexual. It was just dancing and audiences were like shocked. They were surprised. They were like, oh my gosh, how could you like put this on the screen? Like this is like a disgrace. But then if we come over to this example on the right, Manslaughter from 1922, directed by Cecile B. DeMille. This is the first erotic homosexual kiss in film. And I put erotic because there's like this history of men kissing each other and it being a joke. So this is like the first instance of it being like romantic. I sort of read up on this film. It was kind of hard to find a plot summary because it's so old. Wikipedia literally had just one sentence for the plot, so I had to look around a little bit. Basically, I think they're in a war and one of them is about to die and they sort of kiss each other after pursuing a shared love interest who is a woman, and they sort of just like kiss and then they die in each other's arms. And it's so strange because the audience was so positive to this kiss. They weren't disgusted by it. But the reason that they weren't so disgusted by it is because the director specifically made sure to sort of walk between the line of close friends and lovers. So the audience couldn't really like distinctly say, oh, they're friends, oh, they're lovers. It's more like a, well, we don't know. It's up for your interpretation. Sort of like the whole, you look back in history and there are like two girls who were really close together and they're like, oh, they were just really good friends. That's basically this on film. So there's that. And also just with early films, there was the sissy trope with gay men. It sort of made them very feminine and like, it sort of made them like look sort of disgusting to their straight counterparts and just made them overly feminine. And we still see that stereotype today, but it is extremely prevalent in early films because that's just all they like. That's the only way that they painted gay people, or especially gay men. Gay women, it was more them being like butch, or we would see them cross-dressing, sort of bordering on the lines of like transgender, but they would never really specifically label a character as transgender. So very confusing, lots of queer coding within early films, but again, never really outright saying like this is a gay character. And if that character was to be labeled gay, it would just to be like a way of comedy or to ridicule said character. Okay, so now we're gonna go on to queer baiting. This is just one of the many problems with LGBT representation in film. I decided to go off of a example that was sort of personal to me. This film came out when I was in like 9th grade. This is, I don't think it's a Miyazaki film, but it's a part of Studio Ghibli. So there's that. I'm going to play the trailer and I want everyone to sort of pay attention to the wording in the trailer and how things are shot. And then I'm just going to get into the problems surrounding it.
Circle. There's an inside and an outside. And I'm outside. Never had that many friends growing up, so I live. Why is it? That mansion feels familiar somehow.
It's really best for you to stay away from that old Marsh house.
Just me, just me, just me. Throw me the rope! Hurry! And I'll be in my dreams, I saw a girl just like you. I've been here for a long time. I wish that I was you. I can't go very far from the mansion. I need to get back. I don't care who Mari really is. I just want to help her. Barney! Promise me something. That will remain a secret forever. On the outside.
So yes, at the time, I'm pretty sure I still identified as straight. Even still, I took the time to educate myself about LGBT issues. And when I first saw this trailer, I was also on Tumblr at the time, and people were raving. They were like, oh my gosh, Studio Ghibli is going to do a film about women loving women. No. So the definition of queer baiting, according to Wikipedia, is a marketing technique for fiction and entertainment in which creators hint at, but then do not actually depict same-sex romance or other LGBTQ representation. Watching that trailer and then watching the film up to a certain point, you would seriously think that the main characters are love interest. Spoiler alert, they are not. The blonde girl, Marnie, turns out to be some sort of ghost apparition of the other character's grandmother, which, I mean, I'm saying this now and it makes no sense. And honestly, thinking about the film, it still makes no sense. But watching that trailer, they're dancing together. That's romantic. The way that the main character sort of looks at Marty through the window, she's like pining. She's like, oh my gosh, this woman is so beautiful. They're holding hands in several scenes. I believe one scene they're holding hands and the main character starts blushing. Like, you look at this like trailer and you just assume that it's going to be about women loving each other, like an LGBT relationship, and it's not. And I remember there was quite a lot of backlash. It's like people were saying like, this is queer baiting, because I mean, you can say that you just interpret it the wrong way, but I feel like that argument is just so fragile because the trailer has so much queer like influence. Like it's extremely queer. And when sort of directors and like production teams take advantage of LGBT people who think that they're going to see themselves on screen, I think it's disgusting. It's not fair. It's like a gross capitalistic tactic to take advantage of queer people. And that is a really big problem in film even today. So, okay, so now I'm going to go on a little tangent. I wanted to use some representations in film to start off, sort of the good, the bad, and the this is sort of questionable. So a personal favorite of mine is The Handmaiden, up in the upper left, directed by Park Chan-wook. Very diverse cast. It sort of deals with imperialistic Japan occupying Korea. So a little bit of a history lesson too. IMBD describes it as a woman is hired as a handmaiden to a Japanese heiress, but secretly she's involved in a plot to defraud her. And I put some trigger warnings in the descriptions as well if anyone even wanted to watch this. This is a beautiful film. It's shot beautifully. I don't know, I'm just absolutely enamored with this film. It's so beautiful, and it really just defies tropes, especially the bury your gay sort of trope where people sort of kill off the gay character. This is a very erotic film also, so if that makes you uncomfortable, I would not watch this film. But the way they depict the relationship, it's very beautiful and it's very sensual. And I don't know, it's just a very great film, and I feel like it's very underrated because it's a foreign film. So please watch that, please support it. I think it's amazing. And now for the bad, we have The Danish Girl, and it is directed by Tom Hooper, and it's starring Eddie Redmayne. Yes. The description is a fictitious love story loosely inspired by the lives of Danish artists Lily Elbe and Gerda Weniger. Lily and Gerda's marriage and work evolve as they navigate Lily's groundbreaking journey as a transgender pioneer. Now, I have never personally seen this film. I've seen a few analysis on it. I hear it's beautiful. I hear it's great. But the only issue with it is that you have a cis man playing the role of a transgender woman. And people can argue, yeah, but it's just acting, so it's fine. But it's not. It's just not, because I forget who exactly says this in the documentary Disclosure, but the person basically said, when you have a cis man playing a transgender woman, you are fortifying the stereotype that trans women are just men with lots of great makeup. It is furthering the stereotype that trans women are not women when they are. So honestly, that is the only problem that I see within The Danish Girl. And I mean, that's like a huge problem. I mean, that's like the entire movie. So that's why it takes the bad spot for the film. And now the questionable, the film that everyone was just raving about a few years ago, Call Me By Your Name. I actually finished watching this morning because I watched the first half like 2 weeks ago, but personally, I thought it was so boring. But I really wanted to talk about this one. So in 1980s Italy, romance blossoms between a 17-year-old student and the older man hired as his father's research assistant. So this film is pretty, lots of pastels, beautifully shot. It's a little quiet and honestly a little empty. But the issue with this one, which is questionable to some people, honestly, it kind of rubs me the wrong way, is the issues surrounding the grooming and predatory behavior from the older man, Oliver, on the left with the blue shirt. A lot of people find issue with the age gap because Elio is 17 and Oliver is 24. And the age of consent in Italy is 14, I'm pretty sure, which is, I'm not in charge of Italy, like they can do whatever they want. But personally, a 17-year-old is in a different space and like state of mind than a 24-year-old. And watching the film, you can see that Elio is just not mature whatsoever. He does these little childish things to make Oliver like jealous, and we see Elio just being jealous from Oliver hanging out with a woman who is around the same age. He's not ready to be in a relationship, even a relationship with a 24-year-old man. And what I also agree with is that the behavior is pretty predatory because he comes into Elio's space. He has to stay there because he has some sort of like contract with his father, and he sort of makes a move on Elio first, and Elio is sort of like hesitant at first, and Oliver as the adult should not be pursuing a 17-year-old child. It perpetuates the stereotype that gay men are, or bisexual men are predatory and want to prey on young children and just paint them out to be pedophiles, and that's not okay. But some people argue that it was like consensual all the way throughout, and like they'll use the age of consent to sort of like justify this relationship. Personally, I do not think it is good whatsoever, but lots of clashing from both sides. So that's why it gets the sort of metal. So now on to TV shows. So for the bad, we have Sex Education. Now, I personally love this show, but the way that they handled Eric's character was pretty poorly. Mostly just his love interest in the first and second season. So if you've never watched Sex Ed, the premise is a teenage boy with a sex therapist mother teams up with a high school classmate to set up an underground sex therapy clinic at the school. So the gist of Eric's relationship is that he basically falls in love with the dude who has been abusing him for years, like bullying him for being gay. And then all of a sudden he does like a 180, and then he decides that he likes Eric, and they just start like a romantic relationship. And it stops because the bully gets shipped off to like boarding school or something. And in the second season, we see Eric in a healthy relationship with the new kid at school. They sort of have differences because they don't really like agree on things and they don't connect all the time. And I think that's what the show tried to like justify, that with the new kid, Eric didn't connect, but with his bully, he did connect somehow. So spoiler alert, Eric ends up with the bully. And I think that is so toxic because it's basically saying that, it just sort of pushes the idea to have the gay character in a sort of abusive relationship that's really toxic. And I'm pretty sure that also happened on Glee. Please correct me, because I'm only on like season 1 of Glee. But sort of seeing the bully, oh my gosh, he's actually gay, and then pursue the same gay character who he bullied for such a long amount of time. It's just like saying, hey, it's okay to be in these toxic relationships. He was gay all along, and that's not okay. You should not showcase that sort of idea because it's not healthy. So it gets the bad. So the questionable is Killing Eve. I love this show to death. The purpose is after a series of events, the lives of a security operative and an assassin become inextricably linked. I guess it's like a poor description, but it's very general. So the issue with this is that Eve, who's the Asian woman with the curly hair, she is bi-curious, and that's totally fine. But the villain, Villanelle, the woman that she's holding, a lot of people sort of question the decision to make her bi and like the villain, and also her being a psychopath. But personally, as a bisexual woman, I love seeing queer characters be villains. But the issue lies within, is she a psychopath just because she's a psychopath? Or is it she's a psychopath because she's bisexual? And in Killing Eve, some people will argue it's the second thing. But personally, from what I've seen all the seasons, they don't paint Villanelle's bisexuality in a bad light. It's just sort of like a chill, nonchalant sort of thing. So personally, I think she's just a psychopath because she's a psychopath, and the writers make sure that they're not linking her sexuality to like her moral decisions. So it gets the questionable medal from me, but some people do not like this depiction of a bisexual woman. So, and then for the good, oh my gosh, I love this show to death. The Politician by Ryan Murphy. Pretty sure Ryan Murphy also created Pose. So the premise of this is Peyton Hobart, a student from Santa Barbara, has known since age 7 that he's going to be president of the United States. But first, he'll have to navigate the most treacherous political landscape of all, St. Sebastian High School. This is really dramatic, but sure. So this show is absolutely amazing. I cannot stress how wonderful it is with representation. It's kind of lacking in the people of color department, poorly, sadly, but when it comes to sexuality, it's absolutely amazing. The main character, Peyton, he is queer. Honestly, I think the majority of the characters in this show are queer. And there's a lot of sort of focus on sexuality as an older woman and like teenagers. And I think that's really important for people to just see. And it's never painted in a bad light. It's like, oh, you're gay. Like everything in the show is just like nonchalant. It's nonchalant and it's not made a big deal. One character that I would really like to focus on in the bottom right corner is James, who's played by Theo Germain, who is non-binary, which is amazing. They play a trans character in the show. But the thing is that it is never mentioned that James is trans, which I think is amazing. It doesn't give the audience, no matter who they are, the chance to sort of dead name James or sort of shame him for being transgender. There is no room for that because the show doesn't allow you to see that. There is no weird, strange fixation on James being transgender or becoming transgender because James already knows who he is. And I think that's amazing. And honestly, the only, like, I remember seeing this show, like a clip of it in Disclosure when they were talking about trans characters, so I decided to check it out. And I just think it's amazing representation for trans people of all ages to see James and have him just know who he is and not go through like some weird fetishy sort of trans thing that we can often see in television shows. And then I'm going to end this by talking about Disclosure, which I have mentioned several times throughout this, but this movie is so important. It is beautiful. I cried like 3 times. Hollywood has done LGBT people dirty since like the beginning of time, but I personally never knew how bad it was for transgender people. There were a plethora of topics talked about in Disclosure, how sort of if you were trans and people found out about it, you would be met with like physical like disgust and just like animosity and sort of the whole trope of you're hiding something or sort of making the transgender person be like a villain, which is really complicated, but always having them be the villain. So it's like, oh, if like everything I see about transgender people is wrong and I have no like in real life like knowledge to gain about a certain group, I am going to follow what TV and like film show me. And that's why it's so important to have positive representation for all groups, especially transgender people. Something that really stuck with me is how a lot of the actors and actresses who spoke in Disclosure, they talk about really problematic films, but they sort of cherry pick around those films to sort of see themselves within a character, and then they sort of look away when something is like poorly portrayed. So they would like pick out a character who's like glamorous and like fancy and like beautiful, but then sort of look away when they're like met with like transphobia or like something bad happens. And I don't think it's fair that we as a group have to sort of cherry pick around these queer characters just to see ourselves within film and then sort of have it be blacked out because something like homophobic or transphobic happens like almost immediately after. So to close out my presentation, please watch Disclosure. And I feel like Hollywood needs to do better. We see these people, we know these people exist, so why are we not seeing them in the films that we see every day? We don't deserve to cherry pick around films just to find the teeniest bit of representation that looks sort of good. Sometimes if you squint really hard, we deserve to be seen in an accurate and positive light. Thank you.
Yay, that was amazing. I learned a lot, personally. Thank you for that. Did you want to open up for any questions?
If anybody has any questions, like I'm open.
There will be more opportunity to pose questions later on if you want to sit on it and let it stew also.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you, Ayana, for that. And again, that was amazing and very informative. And a great start to all of this. Now, Avery, my fave. Avery is going to now take us down the history of Stonewall and bust some of the myths that are surrounding it. Yeah, I'll let you take it away, Avery.
Ooh, thank you. What's up, y'all? My name is Avery. I use they, them pronouns. What's poppin'? I see some of my comrades I hadn't seen in a while. It's really exciting. For clarification before I start, I am not a history buff. This is what I know about Stonewall, but there are some kind of key points that are a little disputed as time has gone on. And so some of these facts may not line up based on who's telling the story. Like even folks who were there, the stories changed multiple times. Even among like one person telling it would tell it multiple different ways to different people. And so just keeping that in mind, I would try my best. And also I have a puppy, so if you hear her, my bad. I'll tell her to shush. But so Stonewall, first and foremost, was a riot. I'm sure y'all expected me to say that. It was not some cute little capitalist parade with all these vendors and just white cis like gay men walking down the street chilling with little pride flags waving them and dancing to Taylor Swift. That's not what happened. Stonewall Inn was a Mary, don't laugh at me. So Stonewall Inn was this bar in Manhattan, New York. And this was, and Stonewall also wasn't 2 nights like folks think. Like Stonewall was actually like quite a few nights. So it was Manhattan, June 28th to July 3rd in 1969. And so basically the context for this bar was that it tended to serve folks who were repeatedly pushed out of spaces, repeatedly pushed out of conversations. So it had housing insecure folks, homeless folks, young queer and trans folks, people of color, Black folks, and just like a bunch of folks that were repeatedly pushed out of any other conventional spaces at the time. And so regularly what was happening before this, police would raid Stonewall Inn multiple times. And what they would do is part of this, I think it's called like the Moral Squad or some shit that they came up with. Oh, sorry. I don't know if there's kids on the call. There's like a moral squad thing that basically was put into action by the mayor, where they could go into these bars and walk up to trans folks or drag queens and have them pull out their identification. And if you pulled out your identification and it said a woman, for example, they would pull you into the bathroom and check your genitals to make sure that it quote unquote matched. And that was just like normal things. That was just normal shit. That was normal stuff that was happening at the bar. And people hated it, but there wasn't like a unified resistance against it yet, because folks didn't have the resources, they didn't have the people, they didn't have the power in that moment to fully rectify that situation and stop that from happening. And so what happened on June 28th is that people had time. So at 1:20 was kind of when stuff started to pop off. Before 1:20 a.m. though, there were some undercover cops that were in plain clothes. I think it was about 4 or 6 of them that were in plain clothes. They were chilling. They were making sure that they had evidence before they called in for backup. And then at 1:20, yes, people had time. 1:20, some detectives, some like regular clothes cops, I guess that's what they're called, in uniform, that's the word, not regular clothes cops. So the plainclothes cops, the uniform cops, and some detectives pulled up and they said, everybody, they was knocking on, everybody, it's a raid. We here, we got y'all. And so some people were like, it happened so fast. Like, I've never seen a raid. I didn't know what happened. But folks who had been through these raids before automatically ran to the bathrooms to hide. They tried to run outside, but they had barricaded the doors and stuff. And so everyone was just in a tizzy because this was wild, this was nuts. And they really just pulled up, cut the lights on, cut the music off, and said, get your identification out, line up, and we're about to check everybody. So they were doing it. And a lot of the men refused to pull their identification out. A lot of the trans women and drag queens refused to go into the bathroom with them. Because like I said, they had time that day. And one of the things that was also happening in the background of all of this was that, and this is like if you want to do a deep dive into Stonewall and learn about the kind of how it was run and how that related to money and politics behind the scenes, basically, there was a whole, I won't get into it because I'm not good at explaining that part of it, but basically, the city was mad, so they were also confiscating all of the liquor because I think they had an illegal liquor license too. And so they took a whole crap ton of alcohol. They were going to put it in the paddy wagon, because that's what it was called at the time, was the paddy wagon, which is the best part of the whole story. But they were going to do that, but the paddy wagons weren't there. So they were like, all right, since y'all won't let us check you, y'all are going to stay here. Y'all are going to stay in line. And we're going to wait on the paddy wagon, and we're taking all of y'all to jail. You can all go. And so as this was happening for like the next 10, 15 minutes, folks started to gather outside, like 100, 200 people started to pull up because people were like, yo, Stonewall's getting raided. People are turning up. We should go. And so folks got all their friends, they got all their comrades, and they pulled up. And so basically, let me not get lost in my notes. So basically, as they're waiting for these paddy wagons, they were trying to keep the peace with the crowd and stuff. But clearly, like, the crowd was starting to escalate, even though they didn't have like set demands. They didn't have like set chants or slogans or anything like that. People who were there were talking about how, can you not? People who were there were talking about how like there was just an energy, and it was just starting to get really like excited. And it was also like kind of a positive energy because people were turning up. People were, it looked like they were starting to do like some walks, like they were dancing, they were taunting the police, things like that. But what started to happen was that the police, as they were trying to keep the peace, started to get aggressive with folks. And the kind of thing that broke the barrier seems to be that they ended up hitting this butch lesbian woman over the head with a baton. She was like, my cuffs are too tight, loosen them. And they hit her, and she was fighting like 4 cops because she was a bad bitch. She was fighting 4 cops, and all like shit popped, like it exploded. This is also the part that is highly disputed because this is when folks say that Marsha P. Johnson also threw the shot glass heard around the world, or that she threw a brick. Marsha P. Johnson later said that she didn't get there until like 2. So that's also like we don't really know what started all off, but what to take away from it is that people were pissed. People were ready to turn up. They started throwing bottles, started throwing shot glasses. They started throwing like bricks at cops' heads and stuff. And it just, and that was the beginning of the riots. The Stonewall Inn caught on fire. Pretty sure the police did it. And that's the main event of it. And that first night, I think there were about like 500 people. And by the end of it, I think it was like 1,000 people that were pulling up like over the next few days. And so a lot of dope work came out of it. And so this is kind of the start of the gay rights movement at the time, or the unofficial start of it, I guess. And some really dope ass folks came out of it. Some dope folks came out of it. Marsha P. Johnson, Marsha Pay It No Mind Johnson, okay? Sex worker, Black woman, queen, icon, activist, organizer. She joined the Gay Liberation Front after this in the 70s, her and Sylvia Rivera. Icon, Latina, trans woman, organizer and activist. They both got together and they said, look, there's a lot of housing insecure, homeless, street youths that are gay, trans, drag queens, et cetera, how are we gonna pull them together, make sure that they got resources, all the things. So they started STAR. I'm not gonna say what STAR stands for because we don't use one of those words anymore and I don't feel comfortable saying that. But they started STAR, which was an organization that did that. And they also started the STAR House, which was a literal like house for folks to stay in. And in the 80s, they got into ACT UP, which was the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. And they both were just kind of doing hella stuff. And a whole bunch of other people came out of those riots and got into these organizations and were plugging in. And now we have Pride. And last year was the 50th anniversary. I accidentally went to New York that weekend. I didn't know that it was Pride, but it was lit. It was huge. I went for 305 Live for the read and then realized when I got there that it was Pride. But to this day, they be doing vigils outside. They have little like setup things where you can go and look at Stonewall and learn more about it. But in comparison, it is still a highly co-opted movement at this point. As you can see, Pride has, as you can tell from my jokes, my very hilarious jokes at the beginning about how Pride has become whitewashed, it's become borderline heteronormative, it's become like very cis-normative, and has also made a lot of space for like cops at the parades, which is really ironic because there should never be cops at Pride because Pride was a riot against police brutality and violence and state violence. And so, yeah, all of that to say, Stonewall was a riot by Black and brown trans women and folks. And that's that. And cops shouldn't be at Pride. And that's all I gotta say.
Avery, I don't know if you can see all the silent claps for you, but if that's any indication that you did amazing.
That's my version of Crystal's drunk history of Stonewall. Here I'll go.
Perfect. So now we are done with our educational portion. And also, I just want to bring attention to the PayPal and the chat. These people are taking their time to educate us and to educate y'all. And it's labor and it's work that needs to be compensated for. So please, if you are getting educated, if you're learning something, if you have the money to spare and you just got it like that, please go ahead and click that PayPal. Yeah, I think, yeah. And then it's gonna go through. Cool. So now we're gonna actually start. Mary, did you have anything to say?
I did. Yeah.
Yay.
Would love if you could contribute to the PayPal. And some of us are anti-capitalist, so don't feel like just because you're on this call, you have to pay. Do what feels good. I know and trust that y'all are out there in the world trying to make things better in a myriad of ways as well. And that is also labor that I want to respect and appreciate y'all's time for. Yeah, and we're going to continue to learn from each other and learn some dope things. Jay, I'll pass it back to you to introduce the next one.
Yeah. So we're going to start the call to action, and we're going to start with me. I'm going to go first, and then I'm going to pass it along. What it's going to look like is really queer, trans folks really trying to tell their perspective, what they believe in their own personal lives to be solutions, maybe answers, things that we need to be thinking about, things that we need to sit on, stuff like that. And know that none of us have all the answers. None of us know everything. These are also our personal opinions, but these panelists have also been done thorough research, have lived a life of organizing, and have just been through a lot of the marginalizations that we're talking about today. So cool. I just wanted to start out with a quote by Huey P. Newton. In like 1970, the Black Panthers had really not talked about anything with the women's movement or the gay movement, mostly because I would say the women's movement and the gay movement were extremely white and did not make room or space for Black folks to be in, but also white supremacy does leak into all of us. And so we do get that homophobia that white supremacy has provided to Black folks. But I did want to start off with a quote from him. He says, "Remember, we have not established a revolutionary value system. We are only in the process of establishing it. I do not remember our ever constituting any value that said that a revolutionary must say offensive things towards homosexuals, or that of a revolutionary should make sure that a woman do not speak out about their own particular kind of oppression. As a matter of fact, it is just the opposite. We say that we recognize the women's right to be free. We have not said much about the homosexual at all, but we must relate to the homosexual movement because it is a real thing. And I know through reading and through my life experience and observations that homosexuals are not given freedom and liberty by anyone in the society. They might be the most oppressed people in the society." That quote, take it as you will. The one thing I do want to point out is he says they a lot, so kind of to separate Black people and queers, even though there are Black queers and trans folks. But something that I really enjoyed is that he called for unity, and that's what I'm going to be speaking on right now. A lot of the time, when we're saying Black Lives Matter and we're hearing all Black Lives Matter, are we actually standing up for all Black lives? And so what I see a lot is people saying that a lot. It's cool to tweet that now. It's cool to be on that wave to say, I'm not transphobic, I'm not homophobic, I'm not this, that, or the other thing. And I see a lot of it is very performative. And then I see, for example, on social media, threads on Twitter of trans people just posting, a trans person just posting a picture. And all these comments underneath saying this, that, or the other thing. How are you coming to their defense? If you actually see someone doing something, are you going to put yourself in that position to take that? Are you going to stand up for them? What does even coming together look like? What does coming together as one group look like in one unification? And what does it look like to see one voice? Now, that does not mean that the Black diaspora is monolithic. This just means that I think that we should focus more. I don't like the the whole thing about let's put our differences aside. I think what it is, we should recognize those differences and find the parts that then find out and research those differences and see how we can relate to them ourselves and how we can come together to support each other's identities. Without Black trans folk, without Black queer folk, we would not be here. The white queers would not have what they have today. And Black folks in general will not have what they have today. And then I want to bring it back to what does it look like for people who want to change, who know that they've been homophobic in the past, who have been transphobic, this, that, the other thing. Firstly, it is not their job, it is not their anyone who you've been transphobic, homophobic, queerphobic, any of that job to forgive you. If they do not have to forgive you if they do not want to. Also, if sometimes people don't want to be reminded of the trauma that you created for them, which is, could provide, So what I think some steps that you can take if you want to improve on your homophobic and transphobic ways, which we all have, is not something that you can just get rid of. As we know, bias is a thing that every single person on this call has. And because of the state that we live in, we all have some white supremacist, notions that we are wanting to unlearn, we want to decolonize, and we want to work on. And so the first thing I would say is sit with yourself and do some self-introspection. Ask yourself the questions: where did I learn this hate from? Why do I have this hate? How does someone else's identity affect me? And when you ask how does someone's identity affect you, don't say, oh, it doesn't, because it can. Identities can affect. If my neighbors are white supremacists and they identify as a white supremacist, that affects me, right? But how is it affecting you? Is you seeing two people in love on a bench, like doing whatever, does that affect you? Does that affect your walk? And if you see two people kissing on screen, two homosexuals kissing on screen, how does that affect you? Does it affect you? Because, for example, the white supremacist being my neighbor affects me because I'm a Black person and white supremacists kill Black people. If somebody is homophobic or if someone is looking at homosexuality as a difference, what is that homosexuality actually doing to me to threaten my existence? Nothing, right? What do I have against the LGBT plus community? How do I contribute actively to homophobia and transphobia and queerphobia? How do I do that? Asking yourself these questions and really sitting with them, not just saying, okay, I'm just gonna stop doing it, but actually going in and doing the work and the research. And that goes to my second point. Do your own research. Now, that is a double-edged sword because when we say do your own research, that doesn't, it's very easy to find misinformation and information that has white supremacist notions still in it. There are Black writers and Black people who are Black capitalists, who are Black homophobes, who are this, that, the other thing. So just because someone identifies with you does not mean all skin folk are kinfolk. One of my favorite sayings. So when something that I see as a solution to this, there are so many sites, such as Black and Boone, BOIP 100, that actually they post links. They give you access to information. So that stuff is vetted and that stuff is going to be good information for you to look at. If you see that an organization such as Black and Boone, or you see a Radical Kindred is started by grassroots organizers that are going with the community and are relating to the community, and you see that they're doing change and that other queer folks are supporting them, see those signs. We can look at that, and then see, okay, that information is valid. That's what I do personally for me. And then also, I'll put a link in there too about just a couple of books that you can read to start off with, that are surface level and then lead into a radicalization. But my last thing is take opportunities like this. You know, this is you going and getting educated, and this is people signing up to do their labor to educate you. You know, we signed up for this. We were asked, can we do this? And we said yes, right? That's a difference between you demanding information from somebody, because no one owes you information. No one owes you anything. But take the opportunity to, so next time you see something like this, invite a friend. Make sure that you're not the only one seeing this information. This is recorded, as Mary said. Try to get that link, share the link, say, hey, I know you missed it, but here are some queer folks, here's some trans folks who are really giving some great information on and educating us, and this is a great way to do that, and stuff like that. So overall, just to end, I'm really just calling for unity. I'm calling for unity between our brothers, our sisters, our kindred, our non-binary folk, everybody. I'm calling for us to, like I said, not put our differences aside, but to see each other's differences and appreciate them. We know what toxic traits are. We know what is not right, and we know that what doesn't belong in a community. Black folks in academia, how are you making your information accessible? Are we only listening to people, Black folks in academia? Are they the only ones who are deserving to have a voice? Do you believe that the information that Black folks in academia is the only information that we're allowed to have? How are you making, if you're getting that information, how are you spreading it? What are you doing? Are you just researching and exploiting marginalized groups for a dissertation? Or are you actually taking that and putting it somewhere for the groups to use, those marginalized groups to use? Because I know people who have no college degrees that have done an extreme amount more work than people who have doctorates. Yeah, how are we centering voices that aren't being centered? And are we asking for the permission of these folks to get their information, to get their education? So yeah, that's what was on my heart and my mind today. So yeah, I'm going to spread it. Does anyone have any questions about what I said? Oh, that was so sweet. Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to David.
Hello, hey y'all. My name is David. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And so I'm gonna talk to y'all about like some things that are like real near and real dear to my heart because they impact me and they impact like my loved ones like every day. And it's really about like how a lot of the times in like Black Lives Matter, a lot of like Black migrants aren't really talked about, or like it's not something that we like see a whole bunch. And it's like it's a very like complicated thing because we look at like migration, and a lot of times like people forget that we have like so many lovely Black migrants like here in the States that are like going through so many so many like things. I know for like my family, when my grandfather and my dad, like when they first came here, there were a lot of like issues with like housing and making sure that they like were not getting deported and were like allowed to stay there in the United States before like a lot of things were made easier. And like having like a lot of like intersections within this movement of like Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black lives is really important, and like highlighting all of like our beautiful differences is something that is so crucial for us like moving forward. As somebody, I am a Kenyan American. I am also a trans person, and I am also dark, as y'all can see by my lovely skin. And like all of those things like have contributed to making me the person that I am, but also it has made me like a target for a lot of like harassment and like bullying and being in a lot of situations where my safety isn't a priority to some folks. It can be in like family spaces where I have family that are visiting from Kenya, and they still have like a lot of colonial ideas from when we were colonized, like about my gender and how I express myself, and like having to deal with that. But then also, like when I leave my house and I see other people like looking at me and commenting on like the fact that my skin is so dark, or that my clothes look a certain way, or that I'm eating a certain type of food, and like realizing like that there are a lot of reasons, like there are a lot of like things that like people notice and like pick up about me as a person. And in the movement, I feel that we really need to like highlight and uplift these stories of migrants, of like trans migrants specifically, and seeing like how a lot of the times, like sometimes they come here because like there are operations or surgeries or things that they cannot get back in like their respective countries, or there are like opportunities or like laws against them like existing and being their full authentic selves. Like I have family members that weren't able to like come out or like fully like feel safe and supported until they had moved to the States. And that's something that like we don't really talk about very much. Like that's something I just found out after like being around my family for so long and like being loved by them. I find out that I have an uncle that's like that we just don't talk about, or we don't get to talk to because of like his queerness and like how he's like been able to live his life in the States. And that's something that's like really sad, and something that I feel like as a migrant, like I need to look at it, but then like also at like other folks, I need y'all to like look at that and like think about like, I don't know why a lot of these things are happening, or like how like Western influence has really impacted like a lot of migrants, and like the ideas and the things that we continue to perpetuate. Another thing is that also like being a migrant and like being like a child of a migrant and talking about like my experience with that, I see like my family as they like try to assimilate more, get like closer to like American culture for safety and like other reasons where it's like they want to get hired, or they want to like have a job and like a house and a wife and like kids or whatever, like, and the need for like that like upward progression. A lot of the times like I'm sorry y'all, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, wait, I'm gonna start that sentence over. But yeah, okay, so like a lot of the times like a lot of migrant families will have to like forcibly like assimilate into American culture if they want to like be seen and heard, and that's something that's really tragic. There's not a lot of space sometimes for folks to like really enjoy and like have their like cultural identity along with like their American identity. Or for me, like having me being like a Kenyan person and having all that comes with that, and then also being like queer in America, like those are two very like different sets of like traditions or like ideals or stereotypes that like a lot of people feel that I have to like hold up to. And I think that that's something that's super unfair, and something that I feel we all should evaluate. Like, why is it that a lot of people will question what I'm wearing, or question my transness, or like my ethnicity, and like all these other things like in America, but really like when we look at a lot of other folks, or like folks even like just lighter than me, they'll like gloss over it, or like try and make space for other folks. But why not like folks that look like me, or have like the same or similar like lived experiences? So that's really what I'm like challenging y'all to like think about, is like, why do you think maybe migrants have to like feel like they have to assimilate in the culture, into like American culture? Or why do like queer migrants specifically feel like they have to like uphold to this wild queer standard for like other like queer Americans to like fully accept them and like see them as queer? Like these are some things that I hope that y'all like really like take into account and like look at and analyze, because like there's a lot of space, and there are a lot of beautiful stories and opportunities for all of us to like progress. And yeah, that's really all I got to say. If y'all have any questions, just let me know.
That was amazing. Wow, just great. David, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. We appreciate you. Yeah, and go on to our next speaker. We have 3 more left. So, Avery, we're back. We're going to hear from Avery again. Avery always has amazing things to say and amazing information. So, further ado.
You're not gonna hype me up like that. All right. So boom, hey y'all. Once again, in case you forgot, my name is Avery. I use they, them pronouns. And I believe right now I'm talking a little bit about Black Youth Project 100. Lit. All right, cool. So if folks, specifically Black folks as well, are looking for organizations to plug into, or non-Black folks who are looking for organizations to donate to or to look to for potential ideas about politic or events that you could hold or polyed, et cetera, BYP 100 is one of those places that folks tend to go to. So I'm a member of the Durham chapter of Black Youth Project 100. We have about 11, don't quote me, chapters in like Chicago, New York. We just got a Dallas chapter, ATL. Yeah, there's a whole bunch. DC be popping, especially with their work against Bowser. She is not our friend, just a plug. But yes, where was I going with this? Did I say where I was going with this? Oh, so BYP 100, one of the things that I really wanted to touch on was a specific part of our, right, BYP is growing too fast to keep up with. I agree. But one of the specific things and one of our kind of pillars that we go by is called the Black Queer Feminist Lens. And so I think that when we're talking about intersecting identities during this month, especially in a time where folks are, I don't know if y'all saw that raggedy TikTok of that white man talking about how Black Lives Matter was infringing upon the month of June and Pride Month, which, as I talked about with my almost drunk history, doesn't make any sense, because at the forefront of that were Black, queer, and trans people and brown folks and all of the things. And so that don't even make sense, Chad. So whatever. But especially in a time of that and these kind of movements happening like alongside each other and weaving in between each other, it's really important to think about how we are addressing and centering folks. And so what the Black Queer Feminist Lens basically means, to sum it up and not give y'all a whole sociology lesson, as an academic, I appreciated all the academic drags earlier, Jay. But it basically just means centering our most marginalized folks, right? So who is the most affected is probably a better way to talk about that. So if we're talking about evictions in Durham, thinking about who is the most vulnerable to evictions, like, are those Black, queer, and trans folks? Are those poor folks? Are those like already housing insecure folks, et cetera, folks without like capital or places to go or like family to turn to, things like that. And so thinking about how we are centering those people in the best ways that we can. We are also an abolitionist organization, a very publicly abolitionist organization. And so thinking about the ways that abolition and Pride Month really do coincide with each other. You can't, look, I'm gonna say this, people might disagree, but I really think that you can't advocate for Black lives or queer lives or trans lives and be thinking that we could keep cops around. That just doesn't add up. They're not for us. They don't keep us safe. Cops are to protect the property of white men, cis men, het men, land-owning men, stealing ass men, is what that means. And so essentially, they don't keep us safe. So if you think that they do keep you safe, then who do you think they are keeping you safe from? Is it me? Because that's a problem that you need to sit with and really interrogate why it is that you feel like cops keep you safe. And so that's something that we've been doing a lot of work around right now. We have, I think I'm going to stop before I go through all of our stuff. But we're doing a whole lot of membership calls right now. Durham just had about 60 people this past week call into not specifically orientation, but the new member info sessions before you get into orientation. We specified that we center 18 to 35-year-old young Black folks, and that's the only requirement Like that's it. You just got to be Black and 18 to 35 and willing to like pay $10 dues and come to meetings. And that's about it, and do work. But yes, if you are within 30 minutes of a chapter, you can join a chapter in your area. Durham's the only one in North Carolina. I'm sure that Greensboro is cooking something up eventually. I would not be surprised if we see a Greensboro chapter soon. They be trying. But if not, you can also be a national member, and that means that you can still come to the national convenings and all of those things. You can still plug in. You can still go to all of the trainings and stuff like that if you would like. You can still go to South Carolina and chase out Pete Buttigieg if you want to. All of the things that can come with being a lovely BYP 100 member. This was also not an event meant to plug this. I just love talking about BYP 100. But that is all. And yeah, anything else you want from me, Jay? Or does anyone have any questions while I'm here? As Jenny cries in the background. You good? Oh yes, you can read Unapologetic. Yes, thank you. You can read Unapologetic, which is by she was the first chair of BYP 100, Charlene Carruthers from Chicago, started the Chicago chapter. And you can also look up, yes, the founding director. You can also look up, I think, Janae Bonsu, who was one of the most recent directors. She just stepped down recently, but she has research that focuses on the politic of BYP 100. And yeah, there's a lot of academics that are coming out with some research on BYP 100. And I promise you we're not trash. So one day when you see my dissertation on BYP 100, Jay, I hope you don't trash talk me, but I will leave it at that.
I'm sorry. Y'all, also I try academia a lot because I also want to be a professor. So there's that. Thank you, Avery. Thank you for that. Thank you for plugging BYP 100. That is just one of many organizations that's doing amazing work, doing grassroots work that is coming together nationally. Okay. Our next speaker is going to be Michael. They are an amazing person. I met them at Ignite and see if y'all know what that is. And yeah, I'll hand it over to them.
Hey y'all, my name is Michael and my pronouns are Z and Zir and Zim, and I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina. And are y'all able to hear me well? Awesome. Yeah, and like Jay was saying, we met through Ignite and See, which was a really dope like student-centered political org for folks to be able to like host events, like become politically educated. And it was an organization that I found myself politicized in once I found myself like more present and understanding within my own gender. And that felt really important as like a Black trans boy in the South, understanding that like I can also like hold space for my people intentionally and also like demand space for my people intentionally and with purpose and with with organizing behind that. And that felt really special and unique. And I just wanted to talk a little bit today about the politicization of like myself, like what I've been taught, especially by Black trans women and Black trans folks, and what specifically that has done to influence like my own opinions about prison abolition and being able to support Black trans folks from systems that aren't built to hold us. So just to ground a little bit about like this weekend, knowing that it's a anniversary of Stonewall, I think a lot about Miss Major, who is somebody everybody should like know, look up, read about. She's a living legend like amongst us, and was just reading more about her recently and realized like she was politicized while incarcerated. So she was a Black trans woman who was involved in the Stonewall riots, and her politicization was from Black Panthers who were incarcerated with her and taught her about like demanding and holding space for the people incarcerated to make sure that like folks had the things that like they were entitled to. And I felt like that was really important. And when I also think about the history of like what this weekend signifies for me and my people, I also think of Marsha P. Johnson, who a freedom fighter, was somebody who was highly policed, as Black trans women are, but made it a point to still hold space, to still show up on the front lines, even after being jailed, even after being harassed by police. So just knowing that like that's the legacy that like my understanding and like my like Black trans self and my Black trans teachers like falls on feels really important to me. And when I think about these Black trans elders who were like oftentimes like incarcerated for no reason, a lot of times like incarceration for Black trans folks means being isolated. It means being like kept away from communicating with a lot of people. And it really like Black trans folks aren't like when we're like jailed and in prison, like the like institution doesn't even know what to do with us. And to me, that means that like these institutions of incarceration like really aren't built for like anybody, but let alone specifically Black trans folks. And I think about also like a lot of times laws that are created that are like specifically and intentionally made to harm Black trans folks. Like those institutions, I think again reinforce like the ways that like the legal system is really intentionally like targeting the most marginalized of the folks. And if we were to have those who are most harmed by the legal and justice system and those who are most marginalized, when those folks are able to be uplifted and able to have their rights, then I think all of us like will then be able to find freedom as well. Yeah, so when I think about like the legal and justice system, I think about like trans folks' interactions with it, like historically how like Black folks being able to have just like any types of like voting rights, any types of like rights to buy housing, like those are oftentimes like heavily legislated pieces of like just like pieces of history that existed. And when I think about how that is then coupled with like legislation that is intentionally transphobic and intentionally homophobic, just knowing that even things that aren't like directly set into legislation like HB2 and like health regulations, but then there's even small like ways that like civil laws are created. Like I know at my undergraduate institution, getting your name and your ID changed and your photo changed was something that could only be done during certain times of the semester, came with a lot of paperwork and came with like a cost. So like those types of things that we just kind of accept as like, oh, that's just like how my undergrad did it. And it's like, if you were like me, like didn't have a lot of money in undergrad, but like that was something that felt important. It's like there's like these systems that are just like in place that create it hard for us to be seen, heard, and recognized. And just knowing that like these systems also really keep our rights infringed, also really keep us from being able to move in the ways that we want to. I think like being able to find alternatives to those systems are really like the ways that we can make sure that we're able to move. Yeah, and I want to talk just in the end about a little bit about the alternatives that I've learned and alternatives that other Black trans folks have taught me. So I was politicized through a student organization, as I mentioned, but also the Charlotte Uprising, which happened in 2016, was a uprising from people in Charlotte after the killing of a Black man who was sitting in his car reading a book. In the days into those demonstrations during that uprising, somebody who was on the street with us was also killed by CMPD. In those weeks of like the first few days of those uprisings, I was able to learn a lot from Black trans women and Black trans folks and Black queer folks, just about like how to offer rapid response in times that like these systems that are put in spaces to supposed to like protect and service like aren't able to do so. I was able to learn a lot about like rapidly responding, being able to have like supplies for like folks who are on the ground, being able to collect supplies for like medics and like food for the folks who are going to be like in the space and like numbers that like I haven't even like planned for something that large before. So being able to learn about those systems of rapid response and keeping folks housed, keeping folks like bailed out. I think of like other organizations that also provide rapid response from people who are recently incarcerated, people who like are oftentimes like out in the streets and might want like safety kits, like organizations that are like deeply Black and queer centered oftentimes are like like the best examples I can find for these rapid response alternatives. And I also during that time learned a lot about mutual aid. So again, being able to collect funds for folks to be able to be bailed out, for folks to be able to keep their housings when a lot of times when folks are heavily politicized, like landlords can get iffy about folks being able to have secure housing. So being able to like raise and keep those funds, I just think are like models that are really like a lot more helpful for our people than like these like really anti-Black and anti-trans systems and legislations are. Yeah, and the last thing that I just wanted to just hit on was just knowing that, like, again, when I think of Black trans folks and especially Black trans women, I just have learned so much about like how to like keep folks safe, how to keep folks, sorry, how to keep folks safe, how to keep folks like bailed out, how to like unarrest folks, and have been able to like use those like teachings and learnings of just how to like keep people safe. I've been able to like pass that information on to others, and it's just felt really amazing in the past like few years, like coming into myself and coming into spaces where my leadership is trusted and I'm able to like work with other folks and teach other folks the things that I've learned. And I've been able to do that a lot in the past month with recent like actions in my own city. So just being able to like really know like this feels also timely for like Pride. It feels very timely for like how I've been able to like hold space with my people, like both digitally and when we're like on the streets for like just like needing to be out to demonstrate. Just knowing that like all these teachings are coming from a legacy for what for what we're doing in the now and the present, or what we're going to do in the future, just feels really important. And yeah, I just wanted to share with y'all that.
Thank you so much, Michael. Amazing as usual, just like all our other panelists. And then the last planned panelist that we have is going to be Mary. And then after Mary is done, we're going to open up for any queer Black folks who want to take up some space and want to say anything that's on their heart, on their mind. But Mary, take it away.
Thank you. Wow, there's so much brilliance on this call. It's always exciting to hear from y'all and what you're learning and what you're experiencing in this moment and the long string of moments that is life as a Black, queer, or trans person. So I want to talk about, Michael mentioned HB2, and I'm going to try and share a video from my phone. We will see how this goes. Start now, allow permission. Okay, so the video that I'm trying to share is it gonna work? No, that's my whole screen. Okay. Wow, this is so weird. Okay. Can it be horizontal? So this is a timeline of House Bill 2. Is it playing? Can y'all hear it?
I know I can't hear it, but we can see it.
You can't hear it?
No, but it's definitely playing.
Well, never mind. Forget that. So the video that I was going to share goes over a timeline of House Bill 2, which quickly became known as the bathroom bill, or the trans bill, when in reality it's an anti-worker, anti-discrimination violator. It's bad for workers. It's bad. It's disproportionately does affect Black, queer, and trans folks. But the timeline is made by a very white cis-normative organization. So even the way that they lay out the history of resistance around HB2 is pretty hollow. and gives a lot of credit to really large organizations. It gives a lot of credit to elected officials, when in reality, if you were around in 2016, you know that we were in the streets for weeks. I mean, outside the governor's mansion, Charlotte, Durham, Greensboro, every major city, and then right here in Boone, a 6-day occupation at the university. But you know that HB2, which in many ways is still on the books, still exists, but under a different name. But if you were aware and around at that time, you know that HB2 was resisted by directly impacted folks, Black and brown, queer, and trans folks. And they were the ones to put the most pressure on any elected official, any organization, anyone you can think of. So I wanted to talk about them as a way. I'm going to be talking about queer resistance now and in the legacy of Stonewall. And I'm going to be, and as a part of that, I am going to reference some, am I yelling? I feel like I'm yelling, I don't know why. Oh, I'm spotlighted, okay. Okay, can y'all hear me? Okay, cool. So my Wi-Fi is bad. My Wi-Fi is bad, so you can hear me, but you can't see me at the same time. So just bear with me. That's why I'm not on gallery view. Okay, so train of thought. Okay, so I'm going to be as a part of talking about resistance, I am also going to be referencing gender and sexuality-based violence. So just if you want to mute me for a couple minutes, feel free to do that. So HB2 is garbage. But I also just today, right before this call, found out about LGBTQ plus panic defense. Did anyone else see this video? And it's a defense that is on the books in the majority of states that argues that someone who does violence against a queer trans person, what they're doing, thank you, Asher, what they're doing is okay if they were so panicked by this person's identity that they just lost it. There's in 2013 in particular, Eilon Nettles was a Black trans woman who was assaulted and died, and her murderer claimed that he only got violent because he felt fooled. So as a result of that, he wasn't charged with a hate crime. Now, abolition is the big buzzword right now, and I do hold a lot of critique of the carceral state. People who commit violence, we know that they're not any less likely to be violent because of a law, but laws like HB2, laws like the LGBT plus panic defense really do create a culture that criminalizes LGBTQIA plus folks more than their aggressors and potential violators. And that all contributes to a culture where, I don't know why I bother to write out my notes, I can never read it. It all contributes to a culture where lives will continue to be lost and quality of life for LGBTQ folks can only get but so high. A notable statistic, and again, the reporting on some of these numbers is questionable, but there's a video I can share with y'all, and in their numbers, they say that LGBTQIA plus folks make up 4.5% of the population, but 18% of hate crimes. And since 2013, at least 200 trans folks have been murdered, and 70% of them were Black trans women. So the same culture, the same laws, the same policies that make that possible and make that so rampant are also at work when an elementary school a Black student gets sent to the principal's office because of dress code violations. The same things that are at work with the violence that I just spoke about is also involved every time a rural hospital gets closed in the Appalachians or in a historically Black neighborhood. All of this stuff is connected, and Black folks, queer and trans folks, et cetera, have all been resisting in a myriad of ways. But I'm reminded of what Avery said at the beginning that Stonewall started in an organic way. And if you've ever been fortunate enough to be a part of an organic movement, an organic action, I mean, App State students, correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection, nobody planned to be occupying a building for 6 days. It was an energy. It was a gut, it was a collective gut check of this is what needs to happen. This is what we're doing. And this is what we are committed to doing in service of our goals and of our values. And that's beautiful. And knowing that that is a through line from Stonewall is beautiful, but it started in an organic way, and then that energy was directed towards organizing. It was directed towards trying to transform the material gains for queer and trans folks through organizations, through policy, etc. And you know, the unintended consequence of that is it was very easily, not very easily, it was more easily co-opted. It was more easily co-opted, and even today, white cis orgs continue to take the credit for grassroots resistance, which decentralizes the most marginalized, the most directly impacted folks. So I just wanted to say all that to say that these systems are interdependent. The carceral state, what else did I say? Policies and laws and culture that allows violence to run rampant, as if LGBTQ Black and Brown folks aren't human. All of this is connected, and we really need to be deeply conscientious and critical when we're pushing for, say, the arrest of the officer who killed Breonna Taylor. That's not gonna help Breonna Taylor. What would help a Black woman? Let's really be intentional. I also just want to say a few names that I was reminded of in researching in preparation for this call. Tony McDade, Nina Pop, Dominique Fells, Raya Milton, and most recently Brayla Stone, who was 17 years old. Black trans folks continue to face violence, and just be very critical of what you're doing to resist that. She was a baby. Brayla Stone was a baby. Toyin was a baby. And Black babies continue to have to resist just in order to live as their full selves. So that's all I wanted to say. The world sucks. What are you doing about it? Bottom line, I guess. If you are local, I hope that you will join Black in Boone. We're trying to cook up some good work to try and be deeply intersectional, deeply radical in the resistance that we pursue. I also, we heard so many amazing speakers and presentations. I just want to share some of my takeaways before we move on to the next portion of this. And again, this is not fully what the presenter said, but these are what I took away. So hopefully they will help in sort of stitching all of this together. So from Ayanna, I'm really taking away that the fight for and progress around representation in media directly reflects systemic and social progress. And you can tell, if by no other way than some of the problematic ways that queer and trans folks are depicted in media, that Ayanna depicted, that there's so much more that is needed. And what a dream it would be to have so much representation of queer and trans, Black and Brown folks that we could pick and choose like white people could. You know, there's a cis-het 40-year-old white person in 800 billion trillion different depictions. So they all don't have to be perfect. They can all be problematic in different ways, and it's still okay. And queer and trans, Black and Brown folks deserve that same level of representation because nothing is going to be perfect. And media could absolutely better represent us. From Avery, oh, I sort of already read that part, around just taking away that Stonewall was co-opted, and it started as a riot, and you should never forget that. And what beauty is, I think it's so beautiful that we don't fully know and 100% what happened. I think it's beautiful because these moments are alive. And when you know that you are a part of a moment and a movement that is alive, like we are right now, what do you have to lose? Throw that brick, you know, send that email, do whatever your gut tells you to do, because the moment is moving, and if you're not taking full advantage of it while you can, who knows, you might be missing out on the next Stonewall. I took away from what Jay said that critique and question your own bias. How and who are you learning from? And if you're not centering the margins of the marginalized, then you're doing something wrong. You are intentionally only exposing yourself to part of the story, part of the narrative. David, took so many gems away from what David shared. How can we uplift and interrogate our ideas around colorism, migration, and colonialism? How can an awareness of how other countries criminalize queerness make all of us more mindful? Also want to name the fact that so many countries, specifically African countries and nations, criminalize queer and transness because the West exported evangelical Christian doctrine. That's our fault. It's our fault. So every time, yeah, it's our fault. So let's be incredibly mindful about how we are, how we're looking at colorism, migration, and colonialism, because it's all connected. Yes, I'm gonna, yes, okay, so Avery, what's this? Yeah, this was you. Taking away that Black queer feminist lens is the way, the light, and the truth, and that you need to find a political home. Political homes like BYP 100 and like what Black and Boone aspires to be are a great place for you to develop and grow your skills, to be challenged politically, to really get political education that is going to push you and push your imagination, and to be held accountable. We all make mistakes. None of this work is easy. I know I want my personal life to be better, and you know, some big organization came by with a big check. You need people in your circle around you who are going to be like, wait, what are you taking that money for? What are you doing that's actually valuing, or that's actually in line with our collective values over your individual needs? Political homes are great. And then I'm really taking away so many gems from Michael as well, just around politicizing yourself and digging into liberation from spaces that are, oh, sorry. What did I write? Oh, digging into liberation and learning from folks who are politicized in spaces that are counter to our very existence, whether that's behind bars, whether that's in a cage, whether that is in homelessness or home insecurity. So many different places of the margins. There's so much that we can learn and should be learning. Oh, also major takeaway in this movement from Michael, the ways that the carceral state targets the most marginalized, and will all be, and the fact that we'll all be free once they are. How much can we learn from frontline, directly impacted folks around safety, freedom, and resourcing our people? And then just one word, legacy. We're part of a rich legacy. And how are we going to, also want to quote from Mary Hooks, because why the heck not? It is the mandate for Black people in this time is to earn the respect of future generations. Gosh, what's the one about ancestors? Y'all help me out. Honor the suffering of our ancestors. Earn the respect of future generations.
And to be willing to be transformed in the service of the word.
Thank you, Michael. I've been saying it to myself every day. I don't know how I forgot it. So what are you doing, Black or otherwise? What are you doing to honor your ancestors, to earn the respect of future generations, and to be willing to be transformed in the service of this work? I'm gonna pass it back to Jay.
Thank you, Mary. Our speakers were just amazing. Great. Please, if you can, of course, what Mary said is, I still want to echo that donating is not the only way that you can support Black and queer folks, but if that is a way that you can, PayPal down there. And yeah, so we just wanted to open up now for any queer Black folks. If y'all want to take up any space, if y'all had anything you wanted to say, anything that was on your mind. Yeah, does anybody have anything? Faith, Faith, I'm seeing. You already unmuted. Okay, I'm gonna give it to you. Anybody? Cool. Okay. Love it. Anybody else? Last call. And then cool. So did anyone have any questions? No questions? Love it. Did I hear somebody?
Oh, oops. I feel like Michael's users and pronouns. I want to know, I guess from like a couple of the panelists, like what type of like place do you feel like is political home? Like what type of like group or org or event politicized you or has you like feeling and thinking the way you feel and think today?
Ooh, that was a really good question. I'll go first. I'll say that the Black folks at Appalachian State really politicized me. I went there just, I don't know. It was just, not really knowing not really like accepting my identities and like researching them and stuff like that. And then from the people that I met at App State, the black people that I met at App State, I got introduced to Ignite NC, which I met a lot of the panelists at. And that really taught me about a radicalized mindset in the first place, and what that actually looks like, and what that, the actions behind that, and the politic behind that, and really just like how to stand up in your politic, and implement it into your everyday life. With that, yeah.
Hey y'all, Mary, she, her. So I don't know if people are aware of this, but it was all a cabal. It was all a master plan to politicize the mountain. I remember when Michael Brown happened, was murdered, knowing that I politically, personally, was not happy with my politics. I wanted to be further. I wanted, and also feeling a lot of just deep sadness, and knowing that in a rural place, politically, I felt very isolated, and as if, I might actually cry. Y'all gonna stop. I felt so isolated and so disappointed in myself because I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have anyone who was like, you should be reading this, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. It was just white ladies who wanted to use me for their research. So when I hear the question of like what politicized you, it was knowing that I have a responsibility, and this is before I read anybody, knew people's names, but just knowing in my gut that I had a responsibility to do more. And as I've talked to more folks, especially white queers in this area, they also feel that, but don't necessarily have the motivation to figure out what is the way, what is the vehicle. For politicizing yourself. So even if you don't have an organization or a person or a thing or a political home around you, what I'm saying is you have the responsibility to build it, because if you feel that way, other people around you also feel that way. If you feel you should be doing more, if you notice in your community that there's a gap, yeah, you got to build it and they will come. And that has proven true consistently. So just wanted to say that. I'm still honestly looking for a political home. BYP 100, if I'm being real, it's difficult to be engaged and as involved as I'd like to be as a national member. Southerners on New Ground, have immense respect for them and the work that they do, but I also don't feel gay enough, if I'm being honest, to be a part of Song. So that's my real whole truth. Avery, why are you covering your face? And I'm gonna pass it to somebody else.
I was gonna go next if that's okay. That just set me. That was funny to me. I don't know why that was so funny to me. Wow. Recenter. I think so. BYP, I think, is my current political home, obviously, but there were a few things that politicized me. So that HB2 protest that we talked about, that was the first time that was also when I was starting to really get into stuff. Like that's when, right before I quit sports so that I could start doing organizing on campus and stuff like that, or student involvement in leadership and stuff like that. But I remember being at the HB2 protests and seeing the folks, I tell this story all the time, but seeing the Black and brown, queer and trans folks like behind the scenes, planning it, running it, coming up with the demands, having the little caucuses, maintaining like the space and making sure that it was safe. And I just remember seeing that and being like, I want to do that. Like, how do you fucking do that? And I didn't even realize that a lot of them came from Ignite NC at the time. But luckily I did go to Ignite NC, and that was the first time that I think I was challenged in terms of like the method and the practice. So really being critical of like what facilitation is, what is, what's a campaign and why we should be doing campaigns. And Corbin laughs at me all the time because I tell her App State needs campaigns. And that's when I really was politicized in terms of the methods to the madness, if you can say that. And then BYP was the first time that I was really challenged in terms of like politic. And so I remember sending voice memos to my friends every meeting and being like I'll be in the car driving back from Durham to Raleigh, which y'all know is not a fun drive, but I'll be in the car, I'll be like, today we talked about this, we talked about abolition, we talked about this reader, we talked about the Black queer feminist lens, we talked about And I was just so excited to develop this politic that I didn't have time to develop in undergrad because I was too busy running around. I didn't get to read all the stuff that people assumed I read because I didn't read a lot in undergrad because I wasn't doing my homework or any studies. But I really took the time in that moment to say, it's really important to look at the text. It's really important, especially when it comes to things like abolition. Like there's so many conversations that are just hard to find physical people to talk to about it. And so you really do have to go back to those foundational texts. You really got to search out like what this means, where it comes from, and really just help build that imagination. Because a lot of abolition is learning how to imagine a world and imagine the goal of what you're going towards instead of just running away from something, but also knowing what you want that end result to be. And that's really tricky. And so I think that that's why BYP is now my political home and why they're stuck with me until I turn 35 probably, because yeah, it's just that place where I can be challenged in those ways. And I'll pass it to whoever want to talk, or if there's another question.
Anyone else want to share their political base home, where they got radicalized?
Ooh, I can share.
Yeah, I was hoping you would.
Okay, cool. So, I guess like my journey in terms of like organizing and like starting to like politicize myself and learn more started with HB2. Because I was in high school when it like passed and I had like just come out and I was really excited, and then I saw that and it was like the worst and it made me so sad, and I realized that I was like, I don't really like that, and that's not something I really fuck with at all, and it made me like really mad, and I felt more like inspired to like do something about it and like talk to people about it and bring awareness about it, because that was something that like really impacted me like a great deal. And then after that, as I like started to do that a little bit more, I went to like a camp that was like for like queer kids. It was real cute, but it wasn't something that would like radicalize you. But I met somebody that was former Ignite stuff. I met Femi there, and that's when I had like first started to like learn more about like organizing, and like I guess really like she helped like bring me into like a lot of spaces where like I could meet a lot of people and like learn so many things and like be exposed to like all these different ways of thinking. And it was like something that was really beautiful and like really helpful and very transformative for me. So I do know some high school queer folks. They're real sweet. Yeah, it was like a really, really transformative thing for me. I don't think that now I have a political home, because my first political home was the Youth Organizing Institute, because that's where I like started, and that's where I started to learn and like started getting trained and things like that. But now I guess like a lot of like my learning and like being more politicized comes from like my community and the people that are around me, encouraging me to like read more and like challenging like the way that I'm thinking. things like that.
Amazing. Anybody else want to share? Oh, it's just beautiful. Going once, going twice.
Liam, do you want to share?
Yeah, I was like, Liam. I was like, okay.
I'm actually putting you
You're
on the
not
spot,
don't
but
care.
you have a great story, so don't feel like you have to share it, but I think it would be good.
So I was in Oklahoma City before I came back to North Carolina, and I was watching y'all in the streets around HB2, and I was stuck in the military industrial complex at the time. So as a trans and queer person living in that environment, I was really excited to get back here to North Carolina and get engaged with what was going on here. So I came back to Boone, and I was really looking for ways to plug in. I came to App for a degree in social work, and I was really looking for ways to plug in, and Avery snagged me up, saw that, saw me out there searching and floundering around. And I met Mary, and I got connected to Ignite NC. So Ignite NC was definitely also the radicalization of my thought and my political home for a lot of my time while I've been here. And I love y'all. I'm really thankful for everything that y'all have taught me and invested in me as well. I'm very grateful to y'all.
Amazing. I'm gonna cry after this, I promise. Cool. Did anybody else want to share? I'm not seeing anybody. Michael, thank you for that question so much. Michael, did you share?
I kind of shared in the chat, but I can expand.
Okay.
Pronouns. I mentioned about, of course, Ignite NC being a space that I felt like I was able to be radicalized by other queer and trans folks who looked like me and who saw me in my fullest. But when I was an undergrad, I joined a Black sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And that was an organization where I feel like I first learned that like I could be like, like within my peer groups, being able to like organize and make sure we had like, it was like something funky because it was of course North Carolina, and like there were weird like things around like students being able to vote and being able to have like a voting space that was like close enough to us, so we were able to like organize shit around that. And that felt like, oh, like this was an org I learned how to like hold events, learned how to do like voting drives, and also learned like a lot of beautiful like Black like rituals, Black history, Black song. And that felt like an important space that helped radicalize me before a lot of like the queer like anti-capitalist like decentralized radicalization that I think I received after college. Like that was, the sorority was also foundational in like the way that I saw like how people can be involved with politics to make real change.
All beautiful answers from all beautiful people. Yeah, did anyone have any other questions? Amazing. Well, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I want to thank y'all for coming, for getting educated, for taking that step for towards education and towards radicalizing your mindset. Mary, did you want to say anything?
Yes. Hey, y'all.
Yay.
Thanks for sticking in. I know it's Sunday. Wow, where'd the weekend go? I'm sad. But I know that y'all don't have to be here if you didn't want to. So I am gonna, yeah. So I'm organizing Black in Boone with some lovely people, and I know that Liam and the rest of the Radical Kindred crew, we're trying to figure out what more programming folks would want to see. What does collaboration in the future look like? If y'all have thoughts where it's just like, oh, I wish this happened, let us know, because we're building the plane as we fly it. And yeah, we're not going to crash, so it's going to be great. So come on. And then Avery is like, you should follow them. Also want to point back out, you should follow Avery though, because they've been doing these TikToks that are hilarious. But Avery, I noticed you didn't follow me, but that's okay. But you should also go donate to the PayPal if you can. Anyway, I truly love y'all. It's great. Happy Pride in whatever form that takes for you. Okay, I'm done talking. Liam, do you want to say anything? Cool. Jay, back to you.
Yay. All the words said tonight were extremely valid, extremely important, and beautiful words. I want to thank y'all again and thank our panelists. Look at that PayPal, follow those places, all the good stuff. Any last words? Anything else? Perfect. Thank y'all so much.
Can we get an Ignite picture? Ignite folks, if you want to hang on.
Stay behind.
Yeah.
Hey, redrop the PayPal.
Oh, I got you.